The air conditioning in the conference room feels arctic against my skin, a stark contrast to the fever inside my chest. My fingers grip the edge of the polished table, the wood cool and unyielding. Across the room, the wall-sized screen flickers, a cascade of numbers I can barely comprehend, yet they hold the weight of a universe I built from dust and spite. The room is packed, a sea of faces I know, some I don't, all watching the same thing, holding their breath. The murmurs grow, a low thrum that vibrates through the floor, through my bones. Then, the number flashes, bold and undeniable. A collective gasp fills the space, followed by an explosion of sound, shouts, cheers, the pop of champagne corks somewhere behind me. But I don't hear it, not really. My gaze is locked on a single feed, a live broadcast showing the floor of the exchange, the frantic energy, the celebratory chaos. And in a corner of that feed, a face I haven't seen in years. His face, projected onto a screen across the world. He's watching too. The camera zooms slightly, catching the shock on his face, the dawning horror, the blood draining away. And then it happens. He crumples, not dramatically, just folds. His legs give way, his body slumps towards the floor, a puppet with cut strings. He disappears below the frame. A ripple of alarm passes through the broadcast anchors. Here, in this room built by my hands, the cheering continues, oblivious. My world, crashing skyward. His collapsing to the ground. If this story resonates with you, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me tell more of these stories than you can imagine. It wasn't supposed to be like this. Not any of it. A few years ago, my life was a map laid out in neat, predictable lines. I had the corner office view of the city skyline, the one I'd worked 16-hour days for a decade to earn. I had the apartment, minimalist and chic, filled with expensive things we rarely had time to enjoy. And I had him. Mark. My husband. 10 years. A solid decade of shared meals, quiet evenings on the sofa, conversations that drifted from the mundane to the ambitious. We were a unit. A partnership. He was a senior partner at a law firm, sharp, driven, successful. We were the power couple everyone else envied. Our lives intertwined, two vines growing up the same sturdy oak. There was comfort in the routine, a sense of safety in knowing his rhythm, his thoughts, the scent of his cologne when he hugged me goodbye in the morning. We talked about the future, about maybe buying a house outside the city someday, about travel, about kids maybe down the line. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. It felt secure. That security was my foundation. My everything. I poured myself into my work and I poured myself into our marriage. I thought we were building something together, brick by brick, solid and lasting. There were stresses, of course. Late nights, missed dinners, the constant hum of professional ambition that vibrated between us. But I saw it as the price of building that solid future. We were in sync, two engines powering forward, side by side. I trusted him. Completely. With my present, with my future, with my heart. He knew my vulnerabilities, my fears, my quiet dreams. The ones I whispered to him in the dark, unsure if they were possible. He always listened, nodded, sometimes offered practical advice, sometimes just held my hand. He was my anchor in a demanding world. The crack appeared so subtly at first, a hairline fracture in the polished surface of our life. Little things. More late nights for him that felt different. A new phone he was protective of. A coolness in his touch. A distance in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. I rationalized it. Stress at work, a big case, the usual pressures of his career. My own work was demanding too, absorbing my focus. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was being paranoid, needy. The woman who stood toe-to-toe with corporate sharks shouldn't crumble over a few missed calls. I pushed the unease down, deep into the place where I kept all my doubts. The inciting incident wasn't a scream or a fight. It was quiet, clinical. I came home late from a conference call that had run over, exhausted and smelling faintly of airport coffee. The apartment was too neat, too silent. A single note lay on the kitchen counter, under a ceramic coaster. My name, written in his familiar, precise hand. My heart hammered against my ribs before I even touched it. It wasn't a long note, just a few lines. That he was leaving. That it wasn't working anymore. That he needed something else. That he had already gone. Packed his bags while I was away, while I was building the life we were supposed to share. He wasn't there to say goodbye. Not a face-to-face conversation, not a difficult discussion, just
Gone.
The air left the room. My lungs wouldn't work. The silence roared in my ears. I found him 2 days later, after I had cycled through shock, denial, and a raw, howling grief that felt like being torn in two. He agreed to meet in a neutral cafe, the kind of place designed for polite, public pain. He sat across from me, immaculate in a suit I had bought him, his face a mask of calm I didn't recognize. I asked him why. I pleaded. I cried. I tried to find the man I loved in the stranger sitting opposite me. That's when he said it. Not in anger, not even with regret. With a chilling, detached certainty that froze me in my seat. He talked about my ambition, my drive. How it had changed me, made me unavailable, too focused on work. Which felt like a cruel joke, given his own relentless career. But then he looked at me, truly looked at me, his eyes cold and dismissive. You're too emotional, he said. Too fragile underneath. You think you can make it on your own, outside the corporate ladder? You'll fail. This city chews up people like you. You'll be crawling back. Probably back to your old job, begging them to take you back. Maybe even crawling back to me. You'll see. You need structure. You need me, even if you don't know it yet. You'll crawl back soon. You'll crawl back soon. The words weren't just a prediction. They were a curse. A dismissal of my strength, my capability, my very being. They burrowed into my skin, settling in my bones, a cold, heavy weight. He didn't just leave. He planted a seed of poison in my mind, a constant whisper of inadequacy. The first few weeks were a blur of pain and paralysis. I moved through the days in a haze, the apartment feeling vast and empty, a monument to a life that no longer existed. I barely ate, barely slept. The corner office felt like a cage. Every meeting, every interaction felt tainted by his words. Crawl back. Begging. The humiliation burned hotter than the grief. I looked at the corporate ladder stretching above me, the one I had dedicated my life to climbing, and saw only the path he predicted I would crawl back along. The thought of returning to it, broken and defeated, was more terrifying than starting over. My early struggles weren't about starting a business yet. They were about surviving the fallout. The divorce was swift and brutal, handled by lawyers who saw only assets and liabilities, not shattered dreams. He was generous financially, which felt like another insult, a payoff, a final transaction. He kept the apartment. I found a small, generic place downtown, a box of concrete and glass with no history, no ghosts of shared moments. It felt like a temporary holding cell. I quit my job, just walked away one day. The shock on my boss's face was almost comical, if I had been capable of finding humor in anything then. But I couldn't bear the thought of his prediction coming true, of needing that corporate structure, of crawling back. I needed to prove him wrong. Not for him, but for me. To silence the voice inside my head that his words had become. The initial idea for my startup was born in the quiet desperation of those early weeks. It was based on a problem I had encountered repeatedly in my corporate life. A gap in the market, a genuine need that wasn't being met. It was ambitious, maybe even naive, but it was mine. Something he knew nothing about, something completely outside the world we had shared. It felt like planting a flag on new territory, a silent declaration of independence. But turning an idea into reality when you're emotionally shattered and financially precarious is a brutal education. My early struggles were characterized by sheer, unadulterated incompetence. I knew the what of the business, the market, the strategy. But I knew nothing about the how. How to register a company. How to build a minimum viable product. How to find developers, designers, Anyone willing to take a chance on an unknown quantity with shaky hands and haunted eyes. Every step felt like wading through thick mud. Simple tasks took days. I made rookie mistakes that cost me precious time and money. I was terrified. Every setback felt like confirmation of his prophecy. The money dwindled faster than I expected. Rent became a source of anxiety. Food became a calculation of calories versus cost. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. My nights spent hunched over a laptop in the dim light of my temporary apartment, wrestling with spreadsheets I didn't fully understand, staring at code that might as well have been hieroglyphics. The loneliness was a physical ache. I had isolated myself, ashamed of my failure, the public collapse of my marriage, the uncertainty of my future. My old corporate network felt inaccessible, a world away. Friends offered sympathy, but I couldn't articulate the suffocating weight of his words, the specific way his prediction had poisoned my self-belief. I was alone with the doubt, fighting an invisible enemy that spoke in my husband's voice. The early stages were less about building a business and more about rebuilding my own fractured self, piece by painful piece, while simultaneously trying to construct something entirely new on shaky ground. It was a fight on two fronts, and I was losing on both. The mud was getting deeper, the air thinner, and his voice, always his voice, whispering, "Crawl back. You'll crawl back soon." As the months bled into a year, the challenges didn't just intensify, they multiplied like a virus. The initial excitement of building something new faded, replaced by the grinding reality of relentless obstacles. My initial seed funding, scraped together from savings and a small loan, was running out. Potential investors smiled politely, nodded, and then sent polite rejection emails. The feedback was consistent. Too early stage and proven concept, high risk, they didn't see the vision. They saw the struggling, solo founder who looked like she was barely holding it together. Which, to be fair, I was. The technical challenges were monumental. My first attempt at outsourcing development was a disaster. The team missed deadlines, delivered buggy code, and disappeared with a chunk of my limited funds. I had to start over, finding new developers, explaining the vision again, navigating contracts and technical jargon I still only partially grasped. The stress manifested physically. I lost weight, my hair felt brittle, and the dark circles under my eyes were permanent fixtures. Panic attacks became frequent, seizing me in the middle of the night, leaving me gasping for air, curled on the floor of my sterile apartment. Every rejected funding application, every technical glitch, every delayed milestone felt like another nail in the coffin of my ambition. His words weren't whispers anymore. They were shouts in an echoing chamber. Crawl back. See? I told you. The world outside my tiny startup felt indifferent, if not actively hostile. Friends from my old life began to subtly distance themselves. They were still on the corporate ladder, their lives moving forward in predictable ways. My precarious existence, my constant anxiety, didn't fit into their polished narratives. I understood it intellectually, but it hurt just the same. I was the cautionary tale, the one who had flown too close to the sun and was now spiraling downwards. I tried various marketing strategies, pouring what little money I had into online ads that yielded minimal results. I chased potential clients, making endless cold calls, facing rejection after rejection. The phone felt heavy in my hand, a lead weight tethering me to the possibility of failure. There were moments, stretches of days even, when I considered giving up. The sheer exhaustion was bone deep. The constant pressure was crushing. It would be so easy, I told myself, to just walk away. To find a stable job, even if it wasn't at my old level. To stop fighting the tide. To crawl back. The word itself tasted like ash on my tongue. Then came the emails, forwarded to me by a sympathetic former colleague who still believed in me, despite everything. Anonymous emails sent to people in my old network, people I might approach for advice or connections. They painted a picture of me as unstable, unreliable, someone whose judgment couldn't be trusted. They hinted at personal issues, at my failed marriage being a result of my erratic behavior, suggesting my startup was a desperate, ill-conceived attempt to cope. The language was careful, insidious, designed to plant seeds of doubt without making direct accusations. I recognized the subtle phrasing, the specific details that only someone who knew me intimately could possess. It was Mark. He wasn't just predicting my failure, he was actively working to ensure it. This wasn't just cruel, it was a calculated act of sabotage. He wasn't just a former husband who had left, he was an opponent. And he was playing dirty. He was leveraging his network, his reputation, the narrative he had carefully constructed about our separation, to undermine me professionally. He was trying to cut off my oxygen supply, to make sure I had nowhere to turn, to accelerate my predicted crawl back. For a brief, searing moment, the pain was unbearable. The betrayal cut deeper than anything before. It wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the destruction of a shared history, the poisoning of every memory. He hadn't just abandoned me, he was actively trying to bury me. But then, the midpoint shift. Something snapped inside me. It wasn't despair. It was a cold, hard clarity. His actions didn't break me, they solidified me. His fear of my potential wasn't a reflection of my weakness, it was a testament to my strength. He was trying to destroy me because he saw something in me that scared him. His prediction wasn't born of pity or concern. It was born of a desperate need to be right, to maintain control, to diminish me so he could feel bigger. His sabotage was the catalyst. It stripped away the last vestiges of grief and regret. It replaced them with a searing anger, a white-hot determination that burned away the fear. Crawl back? Never. Not over my dead body. Not after this. He wanted me to fail? I wouldn't just succeed. I would build something so undeniable, so spectacular, that his actions would look pathetic, his prediction the rantings of a small, insecure man. My strategy changed fundamentally. This wasn't just about building a viable business anymore. It was about building a triumph, a statement, a repudiation of his words, his actions, his entire twisted narrative. I stopped thinking about just surviving. I started thinking about dominating. I stopped being afraid of failure and became driven by the absolute necessity of spectacular success. The anger was a clean, sharp fuel. It gave me focus, energy I hadn't known I possessed. I stopped seeing obstacles as signs to give up and started seeing them as challenges to be overcome, proof that I was still in the fight. He had thrown down the gauntlet. I would pick it up and beat him with it. Not physically, but in the only arena that mattered to him: success, power, validation. He thought he could write my ending? I would write my own, and it would be a blockbuster. The deepening crisis hit just when I thought I had found my footing. The initial surge of cold determination was a powerful motivator, but it didn't magically fix the practical problems. My money was critically low. The revamped product was better, but still buggy. I had managed to secure a few pilot clients, but they were small, slow to pay, and demanding. The anonymous emails had done their damage. My attempts to raise a proper seed round were met with polite interest, but ultimately no commitments. Investors are risk-averse. Whispering campaigns about a founder's instability are kryptonite. I was trapped in a vicious cycle. I needed funding to scale, fix the product, hire a team, and overcome the negative noise, but I couldn't get funding because of the very problems funding would solve, exacerbated by his interference. I was maxing out credit cards, selling personal belongings I had managed to salvage from the apartment. There were days I debated whether I could afford to take the subway, or if I had to walk miles across the city to a meeting. Hunger was a constant, dull ache. Loneliness returned, amplified by the shame of my circumstances. I was living on borrowed time and sheer willpower. The technical debt from the disastrous first development phase was crippling. Features broke unpredictably. Clients complained. I spent nights debugging code I didn't write, praying I wouldn't crash the whole system. The pressure to deliver, to prove the concept worked, was immense. Every bug felt like a personal failure, a crack in the facade of my manufactured confidence. The market itself seemed to turn against me. A larger, established competitor announced they were developing a similar product with far more resources. The news sent a wave of panic through me. How could I compete with their budget, their brand recognition, their existing customer base? It felt like a giant was stepping on the tiny sprout I was desperately trying to nurture. Doubt, that insidious enemy, began to creep back in, whispering louder than before. He was right. You can't do this. It's too much. Just stop. The thought of quitting wasn't a passive option anymore. It was a siren song, promising an end to the pain, the fear, the relentless exhaustion. The crisis deepened to the point where survival wasn't just unlikely, it felt impossible. All seemed lost. My carefully constructed facade of determination felt thin and fragile, ready to shatter at any moment. The lowest point arrived on a Tuesday morning that was gray and cold, matching my internal landscape. An email arrived from my last promising investor contact. Another polite rejection. This one stung the most because they had seemed genuinely enthusiastic. The reason they gave was vague: market timing, internal strategy shift. But I knew. The whispers had reached them. The well was poisoned. I sat at my cheap desk in my generic apartment, staring at the screen, tears finally streaming down my face, quiet, hopeless tears. The silence of the apartment pressed in. The weight of my failure was crushing. I picked up my phone, scrolling through contacts. My old boss's number seemed to gleam on the screen. Crawl back. The words echoed, not as a cruel prediction anymore, but as a grim inevitability. I hovered my finger over the call button. The fight felt over. Then, something stopped me. It wasn't a sudden burst of energy or a magical epiphany. It was smaller, quieter. I looked around my sterile apartment, at the unpacked boxes from my old life, at the cheap furniture, at the reflection of my gaunt face in the dark screen. This wasn't me. This wasn't the future I had dreamed of, not even before Mark. This was a life built on someone else's prediction of my failure. This was the life of someone who had given up. I thought of Mark's face when he said those words. The cold certainty, the dismissal, the sheer arrogance of assuming he knew my limits better than I did. I thought of the anonymous emails, the calculated malice. He hadn't just wanted me gone, he had wanted me destroyed. A different kind of cold settled over me. Not the cold of despair, but the cold of resolve. If I quit now, he wins. His prediction comes true, not because he was right about me, but because his actions force me into it. He gets to tell his story, the one where he was the sensible one, and I was the emotional mess who couldn't handle the real world. And the worst part? I would know every single day that I had let him be right, that I had crawled back. I deleted my old boss's number. The fight wasn't over. Not yet. This was the turning point. A hardening of will forged in the fire of absolute defeat. I was done fighting for success. I was fighting for vindication, for self-respect, for the right to write my own story. My strategy shifted again, subtly but profoundly. Survival wasn't enough. Proving him wrong wasn't enough. I needed something undeniable. Something that would make his prediction not just wrong, but laughable. Something that would silence his whispers forever. I pivoted the business slightly but crucially. I focused on a niche within the niche, a problem so specific and painful for businesses that they would pay a premium to solve it, even from an unproven startup. It was a risky move, narrowing my market, but it meant I could become the absolute best at one very specific thing, rather than mediocre at many. I stopped chasing every potential investor and focused on building a product so good, so indispensable, that investment would become inevitable. I cut costs ruthlessly, working even longer hours, relying on instant ramen and sheer fumes. I started reaching out to people in my old network again, but differently this time. Not asking for help or money, but offering insights, demonstrating expertise, proving that I was still capable, still sharp. I didn't mention my personal life or the difficulties I was facing. I presented myself as a focused, driven professional with a clear vision. I let my work speak for me. Slowly, cautiously, some doors began to open. Not with investment, not yet, but with introductions, advice, quiet support. The most critical part of the turning point involved his sabotage. I didn't confront him. I didn't expose the emails publicly. That wasn't my fight. My fight was building. Instead, I leveraged what he had done. The anonymous emails had inadvertently created a narrative about me being unpredictable, a maverick. I decided to lean into it. I positioned my startup not just as a solution to a problem, but as a disruptive force, challenging the status quo, led by someone unafraid to break the mold. I turned his attempt to paint me as unstable into a narrative of visionary boldness. It was a dangerous game, walking the line between confident and reckless, but it felt authentic. It felt like the only way to cut through the noise and the doubt he had sowed. He thought he was burying me. He was actually forcing me to grow roots deeper than I ever thought possible. The crawl back wasn't happening. I was walking, stumbling, sometimes crawling forward, but never back. The plot twist wasn't a single event, but a consequence of the turning point. As I leaned into the disruptor narrative, something unexpected happened. The industry began to take notice. My focus on that specific, painful niche meant I was solving a problem nobody else was. My small pilot clients, though slow to pay, were getting incredible results. Word started to spread, not through my carefully crafted network, but through the users themselves. Organic growth. The kind investors dream of. And because I had positioned myself as the maverick, the outsider, the one unafraid to challenge the established players, including implicitly companies like the one my ex-husband was a partner at, which served similar corporate clients, I started attracting attention from a different kind of investor. Venture capitalists who specialized in disruptive tech, who saw potential in challenging the old guard, who were intrigued by the story of a solo female founder succeeding against the odds. They didn't care about whispers from a different world. They cared about metrics, growth, market fit. And my metrics, finally, were starting to scream. The real plot twist was how I used the knowledge of his sabotage. I didn't tell the VCs about the emails. I didn't mention my ex-husband at all initially. But I knew why he was trying to stop me. He saw my potential, and it threatened his world, his perception of me, and maybe even his professional standing if I succeeded spectacularly in a market he operated in. He saw my ambition not as a shared dream, but as a threat. And he underestimated me. He thought my drive came from needing his approval, or from a superficial desire for success. He never understood that my ambition was woven into the fabric of who I was. When I finally sat down with the lead VC firm that would eventually fund me, after months of due diligence and intense negotiations, I brought it up. Not the emails, not the sabotage directly, but the prediction. I told them about my ex-husband's words. "You'll crawl back soon." I told them how that felt and how it fueled me. I framed it as a story of overcoming adversity, of resilience, of being underestimated. I used his cruelty as proof of my fire, my refusal to quit. I turned his weapon against him, not in a petty way, but as part of my founder story, my narrative of why I was the person to lead this company, because I knew what it meant to fight, to be counted out, to build something from nothing. It was a gamble, showing vulnerability, but it resonated. They saw the grit, the determination forged in that specific crucible. The plot twist for him wasn't just that I succeeded. It was that I succeeded because of the very challenges he put in my way. My resilience, my focus, the decision to become a disruptor, all of it was amplified by his actions. He had tried to poison the well, but instead, he had fertilized the ground around me, forcing me to grow stronger, faster, and in directions he could never have anticipated. He thought he had stacked the deck against me, ensuring a small, humiliating failure. He couldn't have conceived that his interference would help forge the steel spine required to build a company that would break national records. He was blindsided because he thought he understood my motivations and my limits. He didn't. And he never saw the countermove coming, using his own narrative of my failure as the bedrock of my success story. My IPO wasn't just a financial win. It was the ultimate, irrefutable refutation of his prediction, amplified by the fact that his malice had inadvertently played a part in my ascent. The climax. It wasn't just a moment. It was a tidal wave. The decision to go public was terrifying, exhilarating, the culmination of years of relentless work, sacrifice, and defying gravity. The day of the IPO arrived cloaked in a nervous energy that was almost visible. We were at the stock exchange, the floor a controlled chaos of shouting traders and flashing screens. My team was there, the small, dedicated group who had believed when few others did. Investors, bankers, lawyers, all buzzing around, the air thick with anticipation. I stood on the podium, the bell hanging above me, heavy with symbolism. My heart was pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. My palms were slick with sweat. This was it. The culmination. The gamble. The vindication. The silence fell as the countdown began, a collective intake of breath from everyone in the room, everyone watching on screens around the world. 3, 2, 1. I hit the button. The bell rang, a clear, resonant sound that cut through the silence, signaling our public debut. And then the numbers started flashing. The initial share price, the immediate trades. And they weren't just good. They were spectacular. The demand was unprecedented. The price soared, climbing faster than anyone had dared to hope. On the giant screen behind me, the ticker symbol for my company flashed green, climbing and climbing. The room erupted. Cheers, applause, people hugging, tears streaming down faces. My team descended on me, a joyous, screaming whirlwind. But through the noise, through the elation, my gaze found the screen showing the live feed from the exchange floor. And there he was, Mark. He must have been watching, maybe expecting to see a modest opening, a predictable trajectory for the company founded by the woman he dismissed. He was standing among a group of people, perhaps colleagues, perhaps clients. His smile was fixed, professional. But as the numbers climbed, the smile faltered. His eyes widened. The color drained from his face, leaving it ashen. The numbers kept climbing. Past predictions, past expectations, breaking records for an IPO in our sector. The disbelief contorted his features. The carefully constructed mask of indifference shattered. And then, as the announcer's voice declared it a record-breaking debut, the broadcast feed zoomed slightly, capturing him fully. He looked like he had been struck. The sheer scale of the success, the undeniable reality of it, seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He swayed. His eyes rolled back slightly. And then he collapsed. Just folded in on himself, sinking out of view as the people around him surged forward in alarm. The image stayed burned into my mind, even as the celebration around me reached a fever pitch. His collapse wasn't just a reaction to my financial success. It was the physical manifestation of his worldview imploding. His prediction had not only been wrong, it had been spectacularly, publicly, historically wrong. The woman he dismissed, the woman he thought would crawl back, had just built an empire that dwarfed anything he could have imagined. The vindication wasn't just sweet, it was absolute. The climax wasn't just hitting a bell, it was watching the sound waves travel across the world and shatter the man who tried to silence me. The aftermath was complex. The days and weeks that followed the IPO were a whirlwind of media interviews, board meetings, strategic planning sessions. My life changed overnight, fundamentally and irrevocably. The financial security was absolute, overwhelming. I could buy anything, go anywhere. But the feeling wasn't simple euphoria. There was pride, yes, immense pride in what I had built, in the team, in the product that was genuinely helping people. But there was also a strange hollowness. The loneliness that had been a dull ache during the struggle intensified in a different way. Success at this level is isolating. The people around you change. The motivations of those who approach you become suspect. The quiet moments in my now much larger, much more expensive apartment were still just as silent as they had been in the old one. And there was Mark. The image of his collapse stayed with me. It wasn't a moment of pure triumph, not like I might have imagined during the darkest days. It was tinged with something else. A sadness for the man I had loved, mixed with a fierce, cold satisfaction that his cruelty had backfired so spectacularly. I never heard from him directly after that day. There were rumors, of course, filtered through mutual acquaintances. He had been briefly hospitalized. His collapse was attributed to stress. The speculation within his circles about why that particular IPO had affected him so profoundly was, I imagined, a source of immense discomfort for him. His firm faced questions. His credibility was, perhaps, quietly scrutinized. The irony was a potent, bitter tonic. His attempt to sabotage me had, in the end, inflicted damage primarily on himself. I learned that success isn't the antidote to pain. It's a different kind of state. It provides security, yes, and validation in the eyes of the world. But the internal scars remain. The words, "you'll crawl back soon," are still etched into my memory, not as a threat anymore, but as a reminder of where I came from, of the fire that was ignited within me. I built an incredible company. We continued to grow, to innovate, to make a real impact. I surrounded myself with brilliant, supportive people who believed in the mission. I found purpose not just in building wealth, but in creating something meaningful, something that reflected my values that were tested and forged in the crucible of betrayal and struggle. But the victory felt solitary in a way. The person I had shared my initial dreams with was the one who had tried to destroy them. The person I wanted to prove myself to wasn't someone I could share the triumph with, not even to rub it in their face. Their world had collapsed, while mine had exploded upwards. There was no common ground left. The aftermath is living with the consequences of that explosion. The wealth, the fame, the constant demands. And the quiet knowledge that the man who dismissed me as too fragile, too emotional, needing his structure, was brought down by the sheer, unstoppable force of the empire I built alone. I didn't crawl back. I soared. And he watched until he couldn't stand to any more. The lesson wasn't just that I was stronger than he thought. It was that true strength isn't about never being emotional or fragile. It's about feeling those things and fighting anyway. It's about taking the stones thrown at you and using them to build your foundation. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version in the comments below. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these stories to life.